You're listening to Mark of the Maker. And this is episode 9. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 9 of Mark of the Maker. And originally we had planned on talking about Randall knives in episode 9. And actually we, between some research on the topic and some family vacation plans and other stuff, we concluded that we weren't really ready to talk about it yet. We want to pay Randall Knives its due respect and get it done right. So change of plans. We're not ready. And instead, we're going to talk about another topic that we think people find very interesting, and that's pricing of knives. So we'll see how it goes. So change of plans. Hopefully you find the episode interesting anyway. And let's make sure we got all the guys here. Michael, you here?
I'm here.
Tom, you're with us as well?
Yeah, I'm here.
And Sean?
Hey.
All right. So one of the things that comes up in conversation a lot of times with knife makers is questions about pricing. And this is something that came up in our Q&A list. Some listeners thought it would be interesting to hear more about how pricing works for custom knives. And I think what we're going to talk about is probably what sound like a bunch of differences between the guys and maybe some differences from some things we see in the industry. And I don't know. We'll see where it goes. It'd be a very interesting conversation. So, Michael, you want to kick it off with kind of some background on maybe where you were on how you price knives. I know you do things a little bit different now, but where did you start out with the whole thing?
I had a horrible system when I first started out. I had no idea how I was supposed to price stuff. It was the early 2000s when I first started, selling things like that. And I just had no clue, were you supposed to do it on how hard it was? Were you supposed to do it on the materials, on how long it took you? So I basically just looked around, in all the forums and tried to compare what I was doing to other people, which is very hard to do. Especially when you're looking at your own stuff versus someone else's. It's easy to say, well, mine's not quite good enough. Mine has these issues that theirs may not, and all these problems, that you get in your head. So I basically just was like, okay, this looks like, a $200 knife. And that's how I did a lot of pricing for a very long time. Now, how did you guys do your pricing back in the day?
Tom, you want to take a swing at it?
Yeah, I mean, when I started out, setting a price on my knives was probably one of the hardest things I had to do as far as being a knife maker. I still find it difficult to do. I'm very nervous about pricing my knives too expensive. But when I started out, I kind of had a system like Michael. I would look around and a similar sized knife, from someone else would be this much money, and based on how long they'd been making knives or how popular they were, I would go above or below, and try to base it on what I felt was a good value. And that's really all I had to go on. I had no real system. And when you're initially starting out, you don't have any of your own work to base it on either, so it's really hard.
Right. What about you, Sean?
Man, I did it pretty much the same way Tom did. I would look at guys who I viewed as being, pretty close quality wise to me and, industry position as me. And then generally I would err on the side of caution and be a little cheaper because I was really wanting to get my work out there, and that helped, people justify buying it and helped to get knives out there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point right there. You kind of want to be, when you're starting out, of value. So more people get them in their hands. And I was always so scared about overpricing. Someone once told me you can never, once you set your price, you can never lower your price, because then you're telling everyone that bought the knife before then that they paid too much for it.
Yeah, you should never go backwards.
Yeah.
I agree.
No.
But at the same time, it's also been something that's always stuck in my head so much that I'm almost too scared. 15 years later, it's still kind of scared to price them how I probably sometimes feel like they should be.
Right. And Sean, based, kind of along what you're saying, when I started out, I would trade my work for anything. It didn't matter if I needed it or wanted it. I was trying to get my work out there, and that was really the only way that, that people would get to see it. I did everything I could to get my stuff out there.
Oh, yeah, you and me both. I mean, you had to get your stuff out there. You had to get your knives in front of people. You had to get them in people's hands, get them in one person's hand, and maybe they'll show it to a couple friends. And
exactly.
So it seems like a lot of this is talking about selling the knives online, but it's the same situation when it's knives for a show, right? I mean, even when you start out doing local shows.
Oh, yeah, no difference on my end.
I never did any local shows, really. The gun and knife shows, I decided early on that I didn't want any part of that, because there's only so much time you have, and for me anyways, I went to Blade, and that was about it at the very beginning.
Yeah, the gun and knife shows were kind of tough around here. I never set up, just because it looked like no one cared about knives at the gun shows around here.
I've never done a gun show like that. I figure, why should I pay for a table so somebody can come up and maybe insult me? There ain't no sense in it.
That's the truth.
And you would be. They'd be like, you want how much for this? Okay,
so that's kind of where you came from. I know, Michael, in your case, I know you're using a little bit more structured system now. It's still struggling with it, I think, a little bit. But you want to talk about what you're doing now?
Well, the knives, when I first started out, they were very, I guess, more tactical than they are now, as in being that kind of flat-sided, tumbled frame. I was still doing Hamones, or, started out doing the Hamones back then, but overall they were very, I guess, basic, kind of a flat backspacer, and no pivot collars. Like I said, kind of chamfered, sort of rounded chamfered edges. Just sort of your frame locks and stuff like that. But then I started changing how I like doing knives, as in pivot collars, contouring, and things like that. But I never really changed the price of the knife to reflect that. It became like the new basic. Like my basic knife became more and more and more. Yet I never changed really how I had people pay for that, which makes zero sense. I mean, that's a very bad business decision. And that's sometimes, I think, part of what we forget is this is, our job. I mean, we don't forget that it's our job, but we forget that we need to be making better decisions. So finally, I think, between you and Abby and whatever, I got wrangled into setting up a better system of, hey, it's everything from if I have a, 3/8 pivot collar, or if I'm doing a, 1/2 inch, fluted, different contoured pivot collar, or sculpted backspacer, and these are things I enjoy on the knife and are part of how I make knives. But at the same time, I can spend a day on a backspacer. So yeah, I sure should get paid for it. But I was still there for the longest time being, well, this, look at this knife. It looks like someone else's, but at the same time, I wouldn't be looking at the details. I'd be looking at the overall knife, or just friends' knives. And so yeah, that can add up very quickly when it's done that way. And I still cringe when I'm like, ooh, that seems like an expensive knife, but it's getting easier. The older I get, the easier it gets to not feel as bad.
But it should be an expensive knife if you're putting the extra time and work into it.
Yeah, but it's sometimes I see the details and I don't know if other people do sometimes. So and we get to that point where people say, well, that looks like a such and such knife. And I put myself in customers' heads like, and probably not in the right way, and be like, ooh, they're going to judge it as this is the same as that. It's easier said than done, as you guys know.
Right.
So, in your case, you're making almost all folders, right? The fixed blade stuff is a rarity. And I know when you do make fixed blade knives, that question looms large, right? About what the heck do I charge for this fixed blade knife, just because you don't make a lot of them?
Yeah, the fixed blade stuff's even harder because, once we started on that fixed, the folder trend, it's like, whoa, no one really wants the fixed blades anymore, so now that when you go back to it, you're like, well, I'm not used to making them, so they do take me quite a bit of time, and it's more to hand rub, and it's, more materials, more whatever. But yet you take out that lock and all this other stuff. There's a compromise, and there's a give and take on both of those. So it's like, what do you charge for that? Because you still got to get paid for your time. Just because it's not a folder doesn't mean didn't take me a long time to do. So yeah, those are very tough too.
Right. And, I know Tom's got some similarity from that perspective. Probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I had an order with Tom for a folder for an alpha, and Tom was the first guy I had dealt with who, when I started talking about, when he said, hey, what do you want to do with this thing? What are the options? What kind of stuff do you want to do? Sculpted clip or bent clip or otherwise? You were working from a price list, and I hadn't dealt with anybody that was working from a price list for folders. But I know you have some of the same kind of struggles Michael does with fixed blades, right? You want to talk about that a little bit, Tom?
Yeah. I mean, early on, I decided with the folders, there's so many different options, and, basically nobody wants a basic folder anymore. It seems like, I haven't made a lot of folders in the last few months, but, last year when I was making quite a few, it seemed like every single one, the person had to do it with the build wanted to outdo the last one I did.
Right.
And so early on, I came up with a system, and basically, I priced out all the materials and all the options. And if you want, a titanium backspacer, it's X dollars. If you want a Zerk backspacer, it's, X dollars. And that way, and I really should have this kind of posted on my website somewhere. So that way I think some of these knives get fairly expensive, but I think if you know what it's going to cost up front, then I'm not going to feel bad about that. If you know that you want all the most expensive stuff, it's going to end up being a very expensive knife. And I kind of do the same thing with my fixed blades. I have a base model, and that includes like D2, Micarta, or G10, and Kydex. And if you want a mosaic pin, it adds a little more. If you want leather, it adds more. And I think that once you have your base prices set, I think it's smart to do options. Of course, I kind of learned some of that from when I worked for Bob Dozier, because he only offered black linen micarta. That was the base model. If you wanted anything else, you paid extra. And it kind of makes sense because you have to stock more material, so you have more money tied up in materials and stuff like that. So I didn't want to charge for every single different color material, so I don't do that. But there are a few micartas that cost me more money, and so I charge more, like Westinghouse or carbon fiber or stuff like that.
Right.
There's that train for you.
Yep. Right on time.
I think that's very smart when you said about do we need to pause for the train here and let it have its due, or?
It's about through.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. It had its say.
But I think it's very smart to, like you said, have a list that's almost out there. I mean, if I had mine finalized and like wasn't still trying to find out exactly where I need to be on these things, I would probably have it out there, because it puts so that way people realize, yes, you can still get let's say a $900 or $800 knife, base knife. You can still get that cheap base knife. You're deciding to buy the expensive knife. This is the reason why This is such an expensive knife. And I think it's good for customers to kind of see that. And they do when when it's an order type thing and they see, okay, this is why, this is that and that and that. And that makes sense.
Yeah. It's sort of a catch-22. You want to be able to have flexibility with stuff. At the same time, I don't know, it seems like it could be a giant black hole of time with, starting to get quizzed about what does the price list look like? And well, what about this material, or what about that material? Unless it was, and I think you have to do that when it's an order, right? When it's a specific case that you're working on. But people that are sort of, sideline quarterback in it, that seems like it'd be a big pain in the ass.
Now, if you had like one knife, if you made only one knife, it would be very easy. Because then you could say, this is the one knife, this is the one price, and you could have every option for that knife on there. The problem is we don't make one knife. We all make different knives, and each one is a little bit bigger, smaller, difficult, etc. And it turns that whole kind of into a logistical nightmare to map it all out, I guess.
Right. So, Shauna, what about in your case?
Well, the way I do my current pricing is I know what people offer me whenever I put up a knife. So I price under that to leave meat on the bone, but to not leave too much to where I feel foolish.
And in your case, I think you don't make a lot of knives available on sort of an ongoing basis per se, right? I mean, as lottery kind of stuff online or other things, it doesn't seem like you do nearly as much of that. Most of that, when it happens at shows and stuff.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of lotteries in the group and stuff like that because I got folks waiting on knives that have been waiting a long time, and it would just make things overly complicated with them, and it bypasses them, and there's no real easy way around it. I mean, you want people to get knives, but you can only make so many, and it is what it is.
Right.
How many lotteries do you think you do in your group, or do you just kind of keep it from, doing it at all?
I just don't do it at all, really. I'll do, auctions and whatnot, but as far as lotteries go, I save those for shows.
Do you find people get upset with that? Because, generally people get, where's my chance sort of thing, which, there's nothing wrong with that. But
I haven't had anybody complain to me about how I do things. If they are mad about it, they're keeping their lips sealed. So fuck it. Who cares?
We all kind of fall in that weird place of we try to make so many people happy. And in the end, when we do that, the more we chase that, the less people we probably end up making happy, including ourselves. And I fall into that a lot.
Right.
Yep.
And the bad part about that is if you're upset or frustrated, with some system, whatever, you're not making as good a knife as you should be or as you want to be. That's kind of the raw side of that.
So that's one of the interesting things that I think we knew would come up in this episode is that there are some differences, right? And so in your case, Michael, I know you offer knives on occasion in your group. You've been doing this indecent proposal thing. That's probably worth explaining to people. Maybe talk a little bit about that stuff.
Well, yeah, okay. Way back in the day, I opened the order books, and I fully blame John Gonzalez on this one. Because I was like, okay, it's time to open the order books or whatever. And I think it was right before one of the gatherings. And I talked to him, and I was like, what are you going to do? Because he opened his about the same time. I was like, what are you going to do for your books? And he said, I figure I could do about 2 a week. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever, The problem was back then I was making like I said earlier, much simpler knife. It was frame locks and flat slabs and just a simpler piece to build. So I did the same thing and did, the 200, and it's a heavy weight, and I try to, get through and stuff and do what I can. But now to be able to make some of the stuff I want to be able to make and experiment and do things like that, I'll build stuff and offer it up as an indecent proposal. And that's where someone who's on the order list can offer to take that as their order knife. That kind of fills their spot. So you get it quicker, but you may not get exactly what you want as far as, as a custom order.
Right.
Great idea.
It works okay sometimes, but it's at the same time, I know there's guys that want exactly what they want, but there's going to be some things that, like I've explained before through, like, I think on the forum and on the Facebook group, that there's things I won't, you can't custom order, like the Westinghouse and, the crazy stuff. And like Tom hit on earlier, everyone kind of wants the craziest knife before, and there for a long time I was doing
right.
full on custom orders, which was, and I'm talking build a custom knife That's a whole new, I'm talking a whole new design, build a whole new design folder with the materials and all the stuff. So it was like almost every knife was the wild and craziest knife I've ever built, which is just not creatively. I couldn't do it anymore. You can't spend a week, prototyping a knife before you even start on it to, and that time I was probably selling it for $900 or something, and it would take way, way too long to build these things. So each one would be,
well, and a lot more than creatively you can't do it. Financially, you can't do it from a business perspective.
oh, no, hell no. I was upset a lot of the time. I was frustrated, and it just kind of, I had to stop that, it did. And I understand everyone wants a full custom, no one else has it. That's the ultimate, to have the knife that no one else has. But I can't, as a business, do that. And I have to remind myself, this is a business,
One thing you touched on was, and I don't, I don't think that most people understand, is the weight of having 2 years of work stacked up. I have people reach out to me about getting a folder, and I'm like, well, my books are closed. And it's like, they can't understand that. They're like, no, I don't mind waiting. And it's like, I know you don't mind waiting, but I don't want 10 years worth of work.
Well, yeah,
right.
It's a tough one to answer when someone's like, well, I'll just add me to the end of it. I'm like, that's not, no, I'm not adding more people to it. This is closed.
Yeah.
This is, and when I get through with this, everyone's going to get a knife that did that. It's just, gotta have patience, and that's why I didn't take any deposits or do any weird stuff like that. It was just an order list. And then it got real weird. People were selling their spots, and it got funky there for a while.
Yeah, I stopped. I don't let them do that at all.
No, I don't condone someone buying or selling a spot. It's vaporware. You're not buying anything.
It's Bitcoin.
It's so crazy.
Well, and maybe this is a good spot to hit that point, or for you guys to talk about that point. So the whole idea of having an order book or backlog of work is, from your perspective, hey, here's a series of customers that I am planning to satisfy as part of this order book thing. But I think the ultimate desired state for each of you guys is to get out of that business and into a situation where you're making what you want to make. I mean, isn't that kind of an achievement threshold in knife making, where, if you're successful, isn't that kind of maybe part of the definition of success for you guys, is to get to the point where you're no longer making knives to order, you're making knives that you want to make, or making knives for shows or whatever?
Absolutely. It's like a form of buying your own freedom. I mean, when you have confidence in your vision that what you're going to make, people are going to like, and you feel free to just create what you want. That's what we're all shooting for. We just want to make the knives that we want to make. And as far as the order list goes, that's like a sword of Damocles most days. I mean, it's just there, and it's like an oppressive weight over you after a certain point. And then you get people who are like, well, I'm willing to wait 5 years for such and such model. And the thing is, in 5 years, you may not want to ever make that model again. So it all works out.
Right.
To a point. I mean, there is some, if it's a small order book, if you're a few, 3 or 4 months out versus 3 or 4 years out, then that's different. I think, but yeah, I mean, definitely, I think the whole point is we all want to, I feel that it's almost stifles creativity when I have an order book for all these orders for alphas, and, I want to make something different. Well, I still have to make alphas or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, very much.
And one thing I've done, I haven't like taken an order. I just have a name in my book. So when your name comes up, I contact you, and, basically you can get whatever I'm making at the time. But,
yeah, same here.
It still doesn't leave a whole lot of room for creativity because, certain models are more popular than others, it seems.
Well, I don't even mind. I really don't mind the custom order. I mean, that hits the romantic side of the knife making to me. the fact that, because you do have these occasions where you actually make a knife that somebody wants, that somebody ordered, it's exactly what they want, and you create this relationship, and it's almost like this throwback sort of situation that I feel like some of these old guys may have experienced, where they're happy with their knife, they're thrilled with the knife, you get to have the experience of making something for them, and I do greatly enjoy that when that happens. But good for better or worse, sometimes, or a lot of times, it's I'm going to go and sell it, and I understand. That's a whole nother podcast about the secondary and how that kind of feeds in this whole market. But when it does happen, it's fantastic. But the weight of this is so great. There's a certain amount of guilt that goes with it, that goes with the shows. Sometimes I worry about going to a show because I'm like, I've got orders to fill. Is it bad for me to go to a show? But I also feel like if I don't go to the show, you are sort of missing out on one of the bigger parts of the community, and part of the reason you're sort of in the community. So there's a lot that goes with it.
And I think shows are super important. And I've never felt bad getting ready for shows. It's what I do. I'm out upfront about it. But I think that it's super important for us for several reasons to do shows. And I think customers are pretty understanding of it. We've mentioned it before. It's a great way to network with other makers and customers and get recharged and be able to go back and be excited about work.
Yeah, it feeds the beast for sure. And that's when I get to see you guys and hang out with you guys. And we're spread all over the world, as knife makers and customers. I think personally, mentally, I need that to see you guys and see the customers and shake hands. But there doesn't mean there isn't a little bit of guilt that goes with, okay, I've got this order list. But when I get it through with it, I think, I'll be doing probably these little things of, okay, here's 5 spots,
Yeah.
Little tiny, bits where you can just kind of easily chew them off. And I think I talked to Mark about this one time, and he had a good, what'd you call it? Paralysis by something. When you have so much work stacked on your table that you don't know what to do.
Oh yeah. It's like at work, we call it paralysis by analysis or whatever, but it's the parallel here is there's so much that it's just an overwhelming task. It's almost impossible.
So you end up staring at your table. What do I start? Because you got to start them all at once, it seems like.
Right.
Yeah. I've felt that way for the last few weeks.
Yeah, I get stuck in that loop a lot, and it's in a very unhealthy loop, creatively and just mentally.
Well, and I think when you have a situation where you're building knives for a show, like you said, there's the reward aspect of it, which is, hey, we get to all hang out together for the weekend and have fun and drink some beers and whatever, you know what I mean? And be part of a human being situation. But at the same time, the reality is the show knives are also knives that let you guys do a little bit of the creativity thing, right? I mean, some of the knives I've seen Tom bring to shows, I'm like, wow, Tom, that's awesome.
Thanks.
Where the hell did that come from? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it does.
And I think
it does let you kind of free, it frees your creativity.
Yeah. And I know in Birch's case, like he'll work on a new feature or a new, machining thing. He's doing some pretty cool stuff now or inlay or whatever. And for you, Michael, I know that's where a lot of times the show knives end up coming from, right? Is from some of that experimentation, which is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah. You want to bring the business, we want to show what we can do. That's part of the fun and stress of it, I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the trade-off, right? And I know, Sean, you get super stressed about the show thing too, right? But do you see the show knives as the same kind of situation where it lets you play a little bit with coming up with stuff for a show that it's not prescriptive, right? You get to make the choices.
Oh yeah, I play it really free and loose going into a show. I just do whatever my imagination and tells me to do that day, basically, for whatever piece I'm working on. And with a show, I do 1-2 shows a year. I'll be doing one show this year. But if you're showing up at a show, you better bring the heat. You better bring your A game. Generally, I try to show up at a show with at least one new or extra unique model, stuff that, is outside my box, push myself on at least one of them, and bring the rest some standard models. But they're models that I want to make the way I want to make them. So, yeah, I really enjoy the freedom that comes from building show knives.
So one of the things that plays into the whole pricing thing is materials. And, some of the materials are pretty damn expensive anymore. So I know in Birch's case, you have materials in your price list. Tom, you want to talk about materials and from your perspective, kind of how they play into pricing?
Sure. So I think, certain materials need to, for me at least, they have to be priced higher because, one, they cost more, and something that some customers may not take into account is some materials are harder to work. I do a white linen micarta, or paper micarta. It's called antique ivory, and it's a little bit more expensive than the other micarta. But the main reason I charge more, and it's not that much, it's like $25 more, is because I can't finish it the same way I finish my other materials, other micartas. I have to actually wet sand it under running water, or it gets discolored. Once it's all finished and I've sealed it with wax, it's not a problem. But up to that point, it can discolor from sanding or buffing or whatever. Another thing is, for natural materials, I usually try to double my money on the material, and there's a reason for that. And the main reason is it's a natural material and it can break. If you're using Mammoth, you don't know what's inside of that. You get inside of it, sometimes there's cracks and stuff, and it's just not usable. Or sometimes you're drilling, like say you're drilling some jig bone, and the bit grabs and it blows out the back, and the piece of bone's ruined. So a good rule of thumb for me is usually double at least the cost of a natural material, depending on the material and how hard it is to work.
Right. So in that case, it's almost like a loss factor.
Right. And it does happen. So more often than I'd like.
I need to add that into mine.
Loss factor.
Yeah.
Well, it's just a good rule of thumb. Natural material is natural. There's inclusions. Like I've been working on bone, and you get inside of it, and for whatever reason, there's a wormhole or something in there that you couldn't see. Or
you'll find it in anything. You'll find it in, the man-made.
Sure.
There's been occasions where the Westinghouse had fiber in it.
Yeah.
Right when you get to it, there's a little piece of fiber. I know it's happened to me and Guinness. And
yeah, I've had it happen.
Oh,
I know Jerry had a whole string of pieces where he kept finding where he kept finding a little thread in there or something odd, or like a fiber or whatever.
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating, and yet we don't throw those pieces away for some reason.
I try to. I had a set of scales that I built for a knife, and it was Stellar Sea Cow, which you pay for by the gram. It's not super cheap. And I fit them up. They looked great on the knife. I came back the next day, and they were curled up like a banana. I was just like, what the heck? And that's after leaving them in the shop. It's just, which is climate controlled. There's stuff happens. And so you really got to take that into account when you're pricing it. Otherwise, it's a poor business decision, and it's not sustainable. If we're not able to pay the bills, we won't be able to make the knives. So really, if you want us to keep us around, we have to use a pricing structure that works.
Right. Right. Yeah. I know Birch has like a little, he's got like a little mammoth culturing farm over there. How long have you had some of that stuff, man, where you've been trying to let it stabilize?
Years and
It's got to be years, right?
Yeah, I've had many years. Then I'll grind them down a little bit, put them back in there, check on them, super glue anything that I think is coming around, any crack-wise, and then put it back. Nice and slow. And then, of course, the problem with the natural materials we see now is it isn't just going to some guy, one place and staying there. It's generally going somewhere and then another place and then another place. The way these knives shift around so much, these days it's real hard on some of these more, like the mammoth, or the stuff that comes from the sea, the mammoth that's, that has the color all the way through. It's comes from the sea and it's very fragile. It's very prone to warpage and stuff.
Well, yeah, humidity or the lack of it.
Yeah, so I'll ask, where do you live? Well, I'll ask people questions like that are weird, but it's like, it's important. It may not work for you.
Yeah, 100%.
What about other kind of material stuff? I know, and this kind of goes to your point, Tom, like with materials like Zerk, right? Where they're sort of the double whammy. They're expensive in the first place compared to tie or other stuff. But then on top of it, there's the whole, oh, by the way, I might burn my shop down working on it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's a little harder to work, but yeah, I mean, you got to take into account the risk, and you have to take into account, the extra hardness to work. Like, take for instance, stellite. Stellite's very difficult to work. I mean, and it's very expensive. So, for something like that, you have to upcharge. I mean, that's just the only way there is, because you're spending more money on belts, which aren't cheap to grind it. You can't cut it on the saw, so you have to grind the profile. You can't drill it with regular bits. You have to use carbide, and usually they break after not much use, it seems like. So there's quite a bit of extra expense when you use stellite or some of these other materials.
So I know you do this too, where you spend a lot of time, like at Blade Show, you get there early and you go look for these materials, and you set up and have these relationships with people that sell materials, and you may get her sometimes cheaper than, what a consumer could get them. Do you charge that price, plus whatever it is, or do you charge what it would cost?
I charge what it would cost, because if I have to replace it, odds are that's what I'll pay.
I think that's smart. I think that's a smart way to do it. I go back and forth on that, but it's like, I've spent years looking and finding these certain types of materials that I enjoy. And just because I found them cheaper doesn't mean it's a cheaper material altogether.
Well, and also if I say I am getting a discount, usually that's because I'm spending more money to get that discount. So I have more funds tied up, and I should be compensated for that. I've gone to Blade and I've literally bought $7,000 worth of material, natural material, and my money's tied up. So even though I got a discount, I need to get a return on that. And that's kind of why I do it. But yeah, if I get a discount on material, that's just a little extra profit, I think, for me, for having my money tied up.
I wouldn't consider it really profit, because you spent that time, getting there early to the show or doing whatever it is to get these pieces.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean,
maybe margin is a better word than profit.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and let's say, like, okay, do you charge for a bolster and then charge more if it's on your price list? Like, say you have a price for bolster, then a price for a Zerk bolster. Do you have each material priced out?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've got it priced for titanium, for copper, for Zerk, for Mokame, for superconductor. And if I'm using something that's not in there, I just kind of price it wherever it would fall in on those materials.
Interesting. Yeah, I probably need to adjust some of the stuff for that.
And I'd be more than happy to send you a picture of my price list if you want. I mean, it's just so you have something to look at. And it might not be that much, but it takes into account that a material's a little bit more money or whatever.
I'll just mark your name out.
Well, it's got to be both pieces. Both that the material costs more money and the work to finish it, right?
Choo choo.
Another train, awesome. So another piece of this, and I'll direct this one Sean's way to start, and then we can have you guys talk about it as well. It is the whole size and difficulty of grind, and it's kind of become, it seems like, more and more popular over the years to do some fancy grinds or multi-compound grind, all kinds of crazy stuff. is that a factor? And how do you figure in things like size of the knife? And I think it probably could be price impactful both directions, both super small or big giant knives, and complexity of the grind. How does that stuff fit in for you, Sean?
I charge the same across the board, no matter what the size of knife is. I mean, if it's a 2.5-inch blade or a 6-inch blade, there's still multiple chances to fuck both of them up in different ways. So I just charge the same and it covers for that. And for the really complex and compound grinds, I just don't do those. The way I'm wired, the way I zone in on symmetry and trying to get everything just right, I found those to be an exercise in frustration for me, and I've just cut those out of my life.
Right. Right. What about you, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I charge more for different grinds just because of the level of complexity, you know, and I think one of the things to look at here is if it's something you don't like doing as much, you can affect how often you do that with your pricing. You know,
that's a good point.
I hate hand rubbing a blade. Literally hate it. It's like I'll do it, but I charge way more than I think it's worth. And the reason is hopefully I don't have to do as many, you know, and I think the same thing goes into the grinds and stuff. I definitely, you know, if I do a compound grind, I have a charge for it. I think it's $100 that I charge for a compound grind just because it's harder to do. And, you know, it takes quite a bit longer time. The Tanto grinds that I do are the same. They're a lot more work and they're much more technical because, you know, I'm flat grinding and I'm chisel grinding the swedge and I'm hollow grinding the blade. So, I mean, it's like a lot of different setup and a lot of different, chances to mess up the grind.
What about like on some of your bigger fixed blades? You know, like let's say someone wants a Damas steel or, you know, whatever, a fixed blade that's 6 inches long. What's the point where, or do you charge by the inch on some of that stuff?
So yeah, I don't really. I mean, if you want Damascus, I have an upcharge and it more than covers the material cost because there's a extra work in doing a Damascus blade and the finishing and in the polishing after it's done and the etching and all this stuff. So, but yeah, I mean, basically I charge the size of the piece. It basically sets in a certain area. Like, so my TK1 is one of the smaller pieces that I do, but it's similar to a Cayenne and a Card and a couple of the other models. And they're all priced the same for the base model. If you jump up a step in pricing, then you're into like the 2.5, 3-inch to 3.5-inch blade size. But as you go up, it starts getting a little more expensive because the bigger the knife, and especially like on like my Beast or like my Ultimate Bore knife where you know, it's a much more difficult grind. I do charge more for those knives, but it's figured into the base price instead of like, you know, if it's a standard grind for that knife.
That makes sense. But
like the Beast, I mean, it's like an 8-inch, or let's see, Beast is about 6.5, 7-inch blade, and it's like it's almost 2 inches tall, and it's 5/16 inch thick steel, and it's a flat grind, and they're hard to grind.
I would assume so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of grinding. And I recently did a batch and I was like, yeah, it won't be that bad. I just edge ground them instead of normally I do about 80% of the roughing. Dude, those things are no fun. That was a mistake I won't repeat.
I bet. Yeah.
What about, you know, one of the things is that one of the interesting things is that different makers all have their own kind of pricing, right? I mean, some folks are charging a bunch more. Some guys are charging less. Some are using a price list and have options and other stuff. What does it mean for you guys when you see different makers with different prices? Does that end up influencing what you guys do, or, you know, is it just, barometer stuff to give you kind of a feel of where the market's going, or what's your perspective on that?
You've got to be cognizant of what's going around you in the community. Even if you don't charge what other makers are charging, you have to be aware of what other people's pricing structure is. Whether it affects your pricing at the end of the day or not, it pays to be aware, because you can get caught in the unawares.
Right.
I mean, the question is, do other makers' prices affect ours or mine? I try to not let it, honestly. I try to figure out where I'm happy, where I'm making, making my money, where everything's working. And honestly, sometimes I'll be honest, I look around all the time. That's just, I think that's human nature. But at the same time, I try to run my own race, and kind of not let some of the crazy pricing that I see affect mine. Does it affect me? Yeah, sometimes it affects me, but I try not to let it affect my business, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense.
I feel like the three of us we're in this for the long term. And I think some of the new makers aren't playing the long game, and I definitely want to play the long game. I want to leave some meat on the bone, and I want to have a fair price for a quality product.
But the question is, what's a fair price? And I think that for a long time, we're told what kind of is fair for what we do, and it's tough to figure out, okay, what should we price stuff at? And it's nature, like Tom said, to kind of look around and be like, okay, this is where we should be, but now it's kind of all over the place. And it's hard not to look at other stuff, and you can't not look at other prices. And sometimes you kind of shake your head, but at the same time, if they're getting paid that, more power to them. But at the same time, sometimes I use that to be like, well, at least I don't feel so bad about, having to pay, or price this one this much now anymore. It's kind of crazy out there, but at the same time, like Tom said, you can't base your success or your pricing on someone else's. It's a different knife. It's a different customer. They have a different idea of where they want to be in the game. And that's not to say that a high price doesn't mean you can't be in the game for a long time. It just depends on if you're finding the right customers, or if you're cultivating that type of buy and sell situation. Which sometimes it's...
So when you said earlier about you're told about where your pricing should be, what do you mean? Who's telling you?
When you're starting out, everybody tells you. Dealers and
well, yeah.
Everyone says, okay, this is where you should be. Or I still get people be like, you need to up the price a little bit on that one. I'm like, oh, it is what it is. I price it there because that's where I feel I need to be. Now, sometimes I wonder, I do wonder if I should price it more, because I do enjoy taking the time that it takes to build these pieces. And good or bad, a little bit more price does give you the ability to spend the time that you want to on them. But it's really that scare of whether the market can bear that, because someone will look at it and be like, well, it doesn't look like that should be that much of a knife, which is very subjective. It's absolutely subjective.
Yeah. I remember standing at your table with you and having that experience where someone came up and said, how much is that one? And the price was there, and they're like,
Yeah.
Like, well, that seems a little high. Or you know what I mean? Like, that was the inference anyway. But I don't know. Somewhere in there, it seems like you have to woosah that shit, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we've kind of grown from saying, okay, this knife looks like it should be this amount of money. But like it or not, the customers do judge knives, at least in the tactical market, by other knives around it. And it's sort of this weird situation of this tactical knives market or EDC market or whatever we want to call ourselves now. It's like our knives are supposed to be priced on the materials plus the cost of a tactical knife. And so people judge them that way. They'll look at it and be like, okay, this has this much zircotie. That looks like $1,000 knife. I don't know why he's charging $1,200, which can be kind of frustrating sometimes.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. I don't know. Somewhere in there, it goes back to the thing we talked about earlier in the show about maybe you earn your place to be able to charge what you need. And if people don't want to pay it, they don't buy it. But the reality is that they will.
That's the thing sometimes. Sometimes I do, as you all know, and we've had long conversations about me and my neuroses and all that fun stuff. You know, sometimes
I was trying not to go there.
Yeah. Sometimes I've thought about, you know, one of the frustrating things to me is you sell a knife for a certain amount of money, and then, you know, which you try to be fair or whatever it is, or where you think it ought to be. And then it inevitably sometimes goes to a customer who sells it, you know, and we're not, you know, the flip or whatever you want to call it. So you get a lot of these end buyers that always end up with a second or third hand knife and paying a decent price for it, which can be very frustrating. Sometimes you wonder, you know, if you raise your price, would it eliminate some of the people that are there for that and get a fresh knife from me to the guy that's going to end up with it in the end?
You're talking about a scenario where you would raise your table price and then the people that are really purely in it to turn it, flip it over, maybe they wouldn't be in the lottery? I
don't know. It's not a win-win situation. It's just something that, you know, that I go over in my head sometimes. It's just the fact that it's sometimes frustrating that guy at the end didn't just get it straight from me. I don't know what the answer is to that, you know, and that's the answer. You know, finding the guy that really wants a knife is truly the answer or the person we really want to find at all times is the guy that really just wants the knife. But we go through a lot of lotteries and rigmarole to get to that guy. A lot of kind of crazy stuff that we've tried over the years to get to him. So it's...
Well, maybe that's the point. That you can't get to that person unless you sell it directly to them. The lottery is an attempt to make it as fair as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you jack those prices up to, you know, but if you really go crazy with the prices, then you get you're chasing the secondary market. So it's a catch-22.
Dancing on a razor blade.
It very much is. You know, you could shoot yourself right in the foot, you know, doing it. But at the same time,
we've seen it happen.
Right.
We have,
in the industry.
But at the same time, you know, I also see the point of saying, hey, I value my work, and someone just slapping a price on it. I get it. That kind of art knife scenario where it's like, this is what I think this is valued, and this is the price I'm putting on it, you know, and I can see that. Now, that doesn't make for a very robust market by any stretch of imagination and by what we kind of seen in some of the art knife world, but there's merit to it.
Yeah. Well, I agree. There's merit to lots of stuff. It just...
they're good theories. I don't know how well they are in practice. That's the problem.
Right.
But things I think about while I'm in my shop.
Okay, so, you know, we talked a little bit about the size of the knife impacting the price, and Tom talked about his beast model, big giant knife, and obviously that makes sense, but sometimes little knives can be a pain too. And so, Sean, I know you've been working on a small version of a knife, and you want to talk a little bit about that and how that fits in and may be a price impact as well?
Well, like I said, I charge the same for the small guys as I do the biggest folder I make. And really, right now, the smaller guys are more difficult for me to grind because I'm used to grinding, you know, like a 3.5 inch blade, maybe 3 1/4, 3 inch at the smallest, and ground out at usually about 1/60 stock. Well, the stuff I'm working on now, it's got like a 2.75 blade, and it's, you know, 127, just barely over 1/8 inch stock. And it's a whole different breed of cat to grind. I mean, your angles are different. And part of it's just because of the comfort zone I'm in, and that's out of my comfort zone.
Right. So from a difficulty perspective for you, it's definitely, at least for now, the little guys, the new little stuff that you're working on is a pain, right? From a work perspective.
Yeah. It's like as I lost thickness, the ability to compensate for any fuck ups just goes out the door. Everything's magnified because you don't have as much material to mess with. And I actually grind those way slower.
Like actual machine speed?
Yeah. Instead of grinding at like 60 or 70 starting out with the little guys, I'm starting out at like 40% power.
Trying to creep up on it.
And it just keeps me from exaggerating any little missteps I may have in the process. You know, like if my angle's off, or maybe I catch my finger on the belt and it skips or something like that. Well, you know, if you're running at 40% power, it's not going to be anywhere near as bad a mess up as if you're running at 60 or 70.
I very rarely turn my grinder over 50%. Sharpening and Kydex are about the only two times.
Really?
See, now I sharpen super slow. I'm sharpening at like 15% power.
Yeah, I turn it up to 75% for sharpening.
You're a wheel grinder, though. A wheel sharpener.
So, Tom, your Splinter is a pretty little guy. I mean, I guess I don't know how that compares size-wise from a blade perspective to a TK1. Maybe they're pretty similar.
I think it's actually a hair bigger than a TK1.
Yeah, I was just going to say, maybe it's a bigger knife.
Yeah.
So is the Splinter, does it have a pricing factor related to its size, or is it kind of like your Alpha from a pricing perspective?
The base price on them is exactly the same because they're really not that much difference in size as far as what really matters. If you were to go much smaller than the Splinter, I think it would increase the difficulty enough that I would actually probably go up on it, even though it's smaller.
Right.
There's that tipping point where you get to a certain point and it actually gets harder. You know, your tolerances are, I don't know, everything's smaller. You got to fit everything in and it just gets really tight.
Well, you just don't have as much wiggle room all around. Like, it makes such a difference when you're fitting the lock, where you could have got by with, that's 5 thousandths too much, where, that would have been okay. That takes us from, 30% engagement to 32% engagement. On a thinner knife, well, you just overshot it and you get to throw that son of a bitch away.
Yeah.
Well, not just thinner. When you're shorter, you're changing the whole geometry. That triangle is a lot smaller.
Yep.
The angle's going to come in at a lot steeper unless you change your lock face angle. It's just that there's a lot more problems with them.
So, Michael, in your case, I know on your kind of your own little internal price guide thing, you do have an upcharge for the micros, and the micros are really, really small. And that's what drives that as well, right? Is the challenges of trying to get the lock right and dealing with tiny blade.
Well, I don't really have an upcharge. I mean, they're the same, except for I charge less for contouring because they are so small. It doesn't take as much to contour those. But yeah, like the sculpted backspacer still a pain in the ass. I feel bad because there's less blade material. I feel kind of like an ass out charging, $1,000-$1,200 for a fancy little micro with Damascus and stuff. But at the same time, they're such a pain in the ass to get right. To mechanically work correctly, they're kind of a pain.
But also at the end of the day, you say that, you feel bad because there's less blade. The percentage of the cost of that knife for a lot, the actual cost of the steel is very small. That's not, I wouldn't feel bad about that is what I'm saying. To me, that's not a big deal.
It's not so much, it's a perception. Me feeling like it's a perceived, because people can naturally look at something smaller and think it should cost less, or see something huge and be like, this should cost more. It's just the way people look at it. So I feel bad that I think it's more like I feel bad that I think people might not like the price I have on it. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, I understand, but I think what we're doing right now is we're explaining why.
Yeah. No, they're
much harder to make. There's less to hold on to when you're grinding that blade. All the way around. After a certain point, and I think, the Splinter for me is about that tipping point. If I go any smaller, it's going to make it much, much more difficult to make.
Oh yeah, there's a point of no return on those.
So earlier in the conversation, I think, Michael, you were talking about the whole art knife thing as far as pricing goes versus tactical knives. And And we know there's some differences there, and some of it may have to do with practicality or what people think of as practicality with respect to tactical knives versus art knives. But you want to talk about that a little bit, the whole art knife pricing thing versus tactical knives?
Well, that's the interesting part of our pricing, is the fact that there is no charge for art, in the sense that, you look at a tactical knife or an EDC knife, and there's this kind of perception that it should be basically the cost of a folder, a basic folder, plus the cost of materials. And it's a very strong perception. You see a lot of people that say that, when people look at something and kind of hem-haw about the price or say it's too cheap, it's because they have a perception of, okay, look at that tactical knife. It should be a basic knife, but we're not making basic knives anymore. We've grown into making these very ornate types of knives. And in the art world, the art knife world, and just art in general, someone puts up a piece of art and they have a price on it. And it's very, very subjective, because it doesn't matter. It's what someone's willing to pay, and it's what the artist values it at. Whether they get it or not, maybe, who knows. But you can't say, that piece of art on the wall is, the cost of, he's using fancy paint, so it should only cost this amount of money. Or the art knives were, they did that where you paid for the art of it. And you can't say that in this day and age of knife making that we aren't making forms of art. We're striving to make designs that are unique and are look good to the eye. They flow. We're not just trying to make a chunk of metal that someone can take to war anymore. We're making pieces of art. But yet it's not. We're expected to not have people pay for that, which is very interesting. That we are that way now.
Well, yeah, I totally agree, Michael, and I feel like, for me, especially your pieces are starting to straddle that line, and it's like, once again, like I said, every knife I made, it seemed like the next person was wanting it to the next level. And, especially with your knives, I look at them and I'm like, that's a piece of art, the attention and the detail you put into it. And you really, I don't know. It's like you're 100% right with the art knives. There's almost like a randomness to the pricing, and it's expected.
But at the same time, the market we're in is very strong because of this, because of that pricing structure that we have now. But it's this weird kind of balance where you kind of wonder sometimes,
right?
Is it ever going to change, or are we kind of stuck here? As a customer, is more of a customer, I guess. What do you think about that sort of stuff, Mark?
Well, about art knives versus tactical knives and the way they're priced, and
the way we're kind of starting to merge a little bit in some ways, or some makers are in some ways.
Yeah, well, it's been kind of a thing that's been growing for several years now, I guess, right? Where there's more and more crossover. The idea of engraved tactical knives seems like an oxymoron, but certainly that's an example of a true art thing coming into the tactical side. And I think, like you said, I think there's probably some amount of at least minor growing pains associated with that. But at the same time, personally, I totally get it. I think, if when there is specific art type things involved, like engraving or some very fancy inlay or otherwise, then to me, it's totally fair game for it to be priced like an art knife. Things like, when you talk about shape and flow and design, I don't know, that's where it's harder, I think, right? Not that those things don't matter, but I tend to think of those things as more about your own personal style or your design signature than I do as art. And I, not to offend your jaunty beret side of you, but you know what I mean? That's for me where that plays in.
No,
right. beautiful shapes are super important, but at the same time, that's part of what sets you apart as a maker, anybody apart as a maker is their eye for it, right? I mean, there are lots of great, very talented, very capable knife makers who don't have a strong eye for design. And as a result, I think walking around Blade Show is a perfect example of it. There are makers that are super hot, and sometimes it's cult of personality, and sometimes it's that they have a hot design element or style that they happen to hit on that people identify with. And in some cases, there are great knife makers making beautiful knives, incredibly well made, sometimes with fantastic adornment and otherwise, who go home with knives at the end of the show. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it's very crazy sometimes. It's kind of murky waters. And I, as a maker, I don't know, where do you walk up and find that line where you've crossed over into that sort of art? Is it the engraved stuff? Is it, it's kind of like with how we make stuff now and what is custom and handmade. You do that same kind of argument, the same kind of is here. It's the line is all over the place anymore. It seems to me.
Yep, I agree.
What do you think, Sean?
Well, man, for what it's worth, I view everything, even the most minimalist user-grade piece I make, as art. So that's where I'm coming from on that.
Do you think you should be charging for it as like an art piece, or do you think, what are your thoughts on?
I pretty much do, man.
Right.
And I applaud you for that.
Thank you.
Now, do you ever get any feedback about your pricing or anything like that? Do you ever get, any complaints or any background rumbling, I guess?
No, I ain't had anybody bitch about it, really.
I want to be more like you when I grow up.
No, you don't, man. No, you don't. I mean, my life story could be titled, "Just Because I Did It That Way Don't Mean You Should."
Right.
We would be slow squared.
Yeah, but I think I've proved that out with how I'm still sitting on the collab project that you sent me.
So one aspect of pricing that came up during prep for the show was the concept of pricing by the hour, or maybe more accurately, accounting for your time or your work by the hour or an hourly price or rate. Michael, you want to explain what you had in mind with this?
Okay, so let's say you get a CNC, or let's say, you start out in something difficult and you get faster at it. Are you supposed to charge less because you're able to do it quicker, or do you maintain that money because you've getting paid for the experience of doing it? It's kind of the idea of getting paid per hour, I guess.
I've never actually ever tried to figure out a per hour price. So, my thought is absolutely not. If you're getting quicker and more skilled, if you're working at a factory and you're quicker and more skilled, you get paid more. If you put the investment and it's not insubstantial into a machine to increase your production without decreasing your quality, why would you get paid less? I mean, it's costing you more. You'd be better off just making less. So, yeah, I mean, as far as a business, I mean, which is how we should be looking at this. If we're getting faster and getting better, and our quality is staying the same, why would you charge less? I mean, it's still the same product. So that's my take on it. I don't think you should get paid less. I think you should get paid more.
Well, how are you going to charge, like, for, say, the CNC stuff? How is that going to come into effect? Because we know, like a real machine shop that I've heard, they charge, basically by the hour, how long it takes to machine something. How is that going to play into your stuff?
I it's hard for me to speak on that because I'm not doing it yet. But I think the way I'm going to do it is going to be different than a machine shop, because basically I'm not going to have the machine running all the time. That's not how I'm making my money. I'm making my money on the finished product. So if I can save myself time by running the machine more, which increases my productivity, then that's what I'm going to do. The whole point for me to get a CNC is not to have parts dropping off the machine finished. It's to do prep work and grunt work and all this kind of stuff, and also have the repeatability so that, if I do want to do some stuff where I do inlays or, scales that can be changed out, because right now I have people that are like, hey, I got an Alpha, it's got purple scales on it or whatever, and I'd really like, neon green or whatever. Can you switch it out for me? And I'm like, no, I mean, that's not, I can't really do that. I have a list I can't just make you a set. I'd have to rebuild the knife basically. And I'm not willing to do that right now. With a list that's 2 to 3 years out, I feel that if I'm doing folder work, it needs to be on knives for the list, not fixing or, not fixing, but not changing the knives that are already out there.
Oh yeah.
So, for me, the CNC is about making a better product, saving myself time so I can do more finish work, and having, parts come off that I can spend less time finishing by hand, but still have the same level of quality and finish.
Now, that thing put it threw this huge expensive wrench into like the pricing structure. I had a hard time figuring out what to do with that, how to do it. And really, I haven't changed much with it. I've never done anything by the hour. Knives would be a whole lot more expensive if I charged by the hour.
Right.
And it hasn't changed with the CNC, especially when you start looking at the time it cost, me sitting in front of the computer, scratching my head, trying to draw shit out.
Well, and it's a significant investment. I mean, I've literally got like a Mercedes SUV sitting back there. If you're making a car payment, it's a lot of money every month.
Very much.
And that's not counting tooling or any of the stuff that works out. That's just having the machine sitting there, not doing anything.
I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier. If we made one thing and one thing only, it would be a lot easier to charge, I think, by the hour for that machine or what the machine's doing, because you would be only making one thing on it. And like the machine here just sits a lot. I feel bad about that. Like it should be running and doing, I don't know what, but something, because I do make payments on it, but a lot of time it sits quiet and doesn't do much.
But I mean, it's basically I look at it as an employee, it's an employee, and it sits back there and it works when I need it. It's going to work when I need it to,
Shitty employee.
And do what I need it to.
Yeah, I get you.
It's probably going to be my best employee.
Mm-hmm. You haven't turned it on yet, have you?
It's a perfect employee, Birch. It does exactly what you tell it to do.
Well, mine's like a little kid that likes to throw end mills against the floor.
Yeah. Here's the challenge from my perspective. What you can't do is think about the machine from the perspective of like you're going to run it like a machine shop, because you're not running your business like a machine shop. You're not a machine shop company, right? You're a company that wants to wear a jaunty beret. Mm-hmm. So you can't at the same time, one, feel bad about the machine not running. Two, think about it like, dollars per minute of machine time, like a machine shop would, because realistically, that's not how you're using it. There are makers, I think, that do use it more like that, but that's not what you do. And I don't think that's what Tom's going to do. And I don't think that's what Sean will do when he gets there with his, but,
right.
And I think Tom's point is a very good one. When I think about it in terms of the stuff I do, like in the car business, the customer doesn't care about whether we hydroform the rails that make the structure of the vehicle or if we weld a bunch of pieces together. What they care about is how it works in the end, right? So in your case, it's more about what does it look like or how does it function or whatever. And I think the monkey wrench that you had a lot more to do with what the perception would be of using a fancy machine instead of you knocking this out by hand all the way through, right?
Very much. And I found it was harder to use the machine, which is strange, and part of that's because of my inexperience, a lot of inexperience on that. But it's very much, once you buy that machine, it's almost like there's still a little bit of stigma to it, even this day and age, and it kind of gets you painted in a corner. And so it's hard not to look at it or try to look at it from a machinist point of view, because I'm not any stretch of the imagination a machinist. So but when you're researching and trying to find out and ways of doing it, there's very much all this information about, setting up pallets and doing it this way and that way, and which has nothing to do with how I do things. It's still,
well, and in the end, it has nothing to do with knives.
No,
it has to do with what Tom described, which is efficiency of throughput for a business.
Yeah, it's production, which is not really what I'm doing here. Which it's nothing wrong with that. Now, but it is things you think about when I'm talking about doing like the V4. Those are things I have to put in my head, which is kind of completely different than how I'm doing the custom stuff, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, it's stuff I'm thinking about. How quickly can it do these V4 pieces? Because I do need those to be faster, because they are a production type piece, as in they're, faster than I'm doing my custom stuff. Just kind of a different world.
No, I think Mark makes a good point. The key is the finished product. And the only thing that would hold us back from that is our industry is kind of a weird industry right now, right?
Very much.
We had, and I think transparency is where it's all at. And I think our customers probably don't care how it's made as long as it's, they can't tell a difference. But I think it got weird back in, the 90s with the Guild and some other stuff, whereas, who was using water jet and who wasn't. Yeah. And I think it all got weird right there. But I think at this point in time, nobody cares, as long as you're not lying about it and saying, I'm doing this all by hand or whatever. I think transparency is a key.
And we hit that a lot, but I think it's just that important too.
Yeah.
The transparency thing.
Sean, you have anything you want to throw in here?
Well, man, what Tom's talking about, what happened in the 90s with the whole water jet uproar, not even to mention CNC. There are a lot of misconceptions about what water jet and CNC and modern machining can and can't do.
Oh, agreed.
And that's something we're going to have to work by.
Well, yeah, I think I don't know, it's semantics bullshit, but at the same time, I think you have to be careful. There are people out there doing massive amounts of the work using the machine. Mm-hmm. I think in the example like what Birch is doing, he's maybe to his own demise is not using a machine to do massive amount of work. It's largely doing a combination of fancy inlay or machining, the venting and the other tricky stuff, along with mostly profiling, right? And then a whole bunch of handwork from there.
Yeah.
But the machine's absolutely capable, if you really wanted to go there, and people are, right, of producing something that's much, much, much closer to the end product.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and like I said, it's going to be used, not that probably well, but it's going to be used to kind of roughly do the V4s, and be a more production type machine. But the point, hopefully when I finally get that, going, but the point was it threw this whole wrench into the pricing for me. I was just like, well, shit, this is a whole new factor that I never even thought about before. But I found that it didn't really change that much.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to change the pricing in what way? What did you think it was going to change?
I had no idea. I pretty much jumped in with both feet and had no clue.
I think the hang up, at least my recollection of all that time frame, was much more in the category of the stigma thing that you talked about earlier, right?
Oh, yeah.
Are people going to talk about pre-CNC Birch knives, or you know what I mean? And that happens, but to me, the vast majority of that happening is in the category of secondary market stuff, and
oh yeah,
I think that's a legit thing to be concerned about, and at the same time, hopefully what you do in the end is prove that it's just another tool to do some extra cool shit that you couldn't do before.
That's the plan.
So the next question we had in here was this whole idea of a cost of living increase. So the concept here is, should there be, or is there a increase, like an annual increase
Yeah, I just want to know if you guys actually gave yourself a little raise every year with the cost of increase or the cost of living increase.
I don't.
I don't. That would be way too professional.
Well, I mean,
I don't either, but I figured Tom.
well, I do go up, but it's not every year. So it's a tough one, at least for me. But yeah, I feel that if you don't, in a couple years, you're markedly underpriced. So, maybe every year I go up maybe $10 or something. But, when I started making, let's say the TK1, for example, I've been making that for a long time, probably close to 15 years at least. When I started making those, they were like $195. And over the course of 15 years, now they're up to $265. But, material prices have gone up, all this different stuff. And it, I was a very good deal to start with, and I kept that price for probably 5 years. But, at some point you have to go up a little bit.
Yeah, there's I feel, like you're saying there, I think if you don't, then you're going to have this 5-year gap, and then you're going to have to increase it a certain amount, a noticeable amount, where someone's going to be like, well, why'd you do that?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's stuff that I don't think about, and I probably should be thinking about.
Well, and materials go up. I don't know about you guys, but I got a notice from Crucible or PM Metals or whatever they're called now, that all their steel prices were going up 25%, which is awesome.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the materials have been going up.
Well, this was because of the tariffs or whatever.
Yeah. Now, Mark, you sell some stuff. How do you do, like, I hate to say it, but the net to me thing? Do you just do like a certain price, or do you say, okay, here's a price and then plus, so much for shipping? How do you go about pricing and then adding the shipping and PayPal fees or whatever to it? How do you go about that?
So for my stuff, it's probably a little easier because it's small item stuff, but mostly I do it all kind of baked into the price. And when I set the price includes me covering shipping and, me sucking up some PayPal fee kind of stuff. So no, I usually don't charge separate for shipping. I kind of cook it all into one number, and that's what people go to PayPal and send. Where I do add shipping is for other stuff that's a pain to actually ship, kind of like you guys dealt with the mug thing, right? We had these Ray Gun Division diner mug kind of things that we did as merch. And, that's a whole, it costs almost as much to ship those as it does for the product itself. So in that case, I charge the shipping, and my main intent there is so that folks understand what they're paying for. You know what I mean? That there's kind of to point out the fact that the shipping cost is a major factor in the overall price.
That makes sense. How do you do the PayPal thing? Do you just kind of roll it into it?
Yeah. Yeah. In my case, I just cook it in. And again, it's small ticket stuff compared to what you guys are doing. So, it's not a significant dollar amount.
What about you, Tom?
So I, as far as the net to me thing, if you're an individual selling, even though it's against the rules, whatever, you can do whatever you want. And I did that for a while, but then at a point, I decided, I don't want to do the net to me thing. So it's priced into my base price. If you buy a knife from me, odds are you're going to use PayPal. I think probably 95% of my business is through PayPal or credit cards, one way or the other. And so there's a 3.5% fee, and that's just part of doing business for me. If I want to sell my product, I need to price it where that's included, and it simplifies things. And it also, in my opinion, it makes you look more professional. I mean, you don't go to Walmart and be like, hey, I want to use my credit card. And they're like, well, I need this net to me, it's just part of being professional, in my opinion. As far as shipping, I do charge shipping separately because, I ship stuff all over the world, and, and I may ship more than one thing. So that way I can, if you've got 3 or 4 knives, I can put them all together and save you on shipping. Or if they're going overseas, that's priced separately. It just makes it easier. That way people, here in the States aren't subsidizing people that live in other parts of the world or whatever. It just makes sense to me to have shipping separate.
Well, that makes sense, especially, if you have 2 or 3 or 4 different things that you can sell and ship together. I don't ever have that. It's usually one thing that I'm shipping.
Oh, we ship, even today, we ship 3 or 4 things. 3 or 4 different packages had multiple knives in them.
Well, what about you, Sean?
So
I don't charge for shipping. With the price I get for my knives, it's a fair price. I'm fine with lumping in shipping into that. I do ask that customers cover PayPal fees, because on the sums we're talking about for some of the knives, it's a bigger hit than I care to take on it. And PayPal is basically for their convenience. I'm more than willing to wait on a check or some other form of payment.
I get that. I kind of go back and forth on all that. When it comes to like the bottle rockets, it's like, okay, here's a set price, just pay whatever, shipping and PayPal and all that's included, unless you're like overseas, then we'll figure that out after that. But on like the higher priced knives, it'll sometimes be, the shipping's always included. I don't know why it is, but I just have shipping included. Unless, of course, it's someone wants something crazy, overnighted or whatever, that's going to be, super expensive. But, usually PayPal, I'll say, if you want to write a check or money order, I don't care. I'll ship the knife and wait for a check. But if you want the convenience of it, then go ahead and add it. But truthfully, I probably just ought to add that into it, rolled into it, just because it's a lot easier.
I would recommend that. It's just easier.
Yeah, I don't want to, do that. But at the same time, if somebody says, hey, I'll send you a money order check, I'm going to send the knife anyway, unless I just don't know you or something weird like that.
Well, when I decided to do it, I added to the base price of all the knives. When it was time to go up, every couple of years when I go up, I just added a little bit more, like $5, and that covers the percentage on pretty much everything.
It depends on if some of those knives can get expensive or whatever, depending on that. And it can add up to quite a bit.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and I totally get that. I think last year I think my PayPal fees last year were close to $10,000. So
yeah, but it's the price of convenience. I don't like doing the friends and family or whatever. This is a business for me, and I record it as a business, and I want, I'm paying them for the convenience of fast, quick payment. So they should get their fee,
Yep. I agree.
All right. So, probably maybe this will be the last piece of it that we hit is, something about, bids and auction kind of stuff. So open bid knives and silent bid knives. And, for folks that go to shows, they'll be very familiar with the concept that most makers will have, some number of knives that are available either for sale or through lottery or however, as normal kind of knives. And then oftentimes there will be fancy knives, that are available through open bid or silent bid. You guys want to talk about that and kind of how it fits into the picture and why you do them, that kind of thing? Michael, you want to start there?
Well, it's like, for a long time, it just has been how we've done it. It's like you go to a show, you have an open and you have a silent. I don't know the why or what of it, but unless you only have one knife or, a few knives, and then you feel bad about it or whatever. But, there's that secondary, which is different from our table price, and it's sort of a way for us to occasionally get a taste of the secondary. So we don't have to, be chasing the secondary market or whatever it is, or go those crazy prices. You do the occasional one of those, it almost pays for some of these other knives in a way.
Yeah. I definitely agree. I mean, I usually try to bring knives to the show that I lotto. So I do a cell phone lotto usually with, depending on the show and how many I get done, 5 to 10 pieces. And then, I usually do an open bid. I've only done a silent bid once or twice, and those kind of make me nervous. But maybe I should embrace that too. But, the open bid, it just allows you to get rewarded. I don't think you should do all your knives that way. But it does give you a chance to build something really special, for the show and actually get rewarded, for doing that. And I think it's something that financially helps us out quite a bit. We get, more than table price, and, it helps us financially meet the expense of the show, because shows are very expensive. I think last year I figured it up, and by the time we factored in the table price and the hotel price and the travel expense and the food, by the time we go to a show, we've spent $4,000 or $5,000 before we've made a dime.
Oh yeah,
so
that's part of it.
So it's a significant expense for custom makers to come to a show. I mean, it really, really is.
But on the other note, it's great. The open bids are great for money for us, but at the same time, I also like the fact that it is the man who wants it the most is the man who gets it, or woman, whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's
sure, 100%.
This is fairness of all fairness. Whoever wants it the most gets it. I do enjoy that factor of it.
Yeah, I agree. Now, when you got two guys that come up and are bidding against each other and then walk off and become buddies and and decide not to bid each other up and blah blah blah, that doesn't really help. But
it's the good and bad. It's of our community.
No, it is.
It's great that we have such a good community that a lot of guys are friends, and it's been to the detriment of many an open bid sometimes, because people are friends and don't want to bid against each other. I can't blame them for that. Nope. Sometimes you're like, oh, but I mean, what are you going to do? What about you, Sean?
Did you hear what he said about you?
Yeah.
I'm a silent bid guy. I enjoy the silent bids. They're fairly stress-free, and you get a pretty fair approximation of what people are willing to pay for your work. But I do an open bid here and there because, well, they're good for business. I mean, hell, they're good for my bottom line. But there is a stress that goes along with them. There's a tension.
Very much, because you're making what is, it's usually a nicer knife or a fancier knife, but you're making still this type of knife. And then when it becomes this X amount of knife, you're like, shit, now it's almost like you get scared that does your knife live up to the expectations of the buyer who pays a hell of a lot of money for it. It gets a bit scary sometimes.
Oh yeah, there's always that in the back of your mind of, well, they just paid this, they're going to get it. Shit, they ain't going to like it. They're going to want to send this back.
Yeah, there's always that scare.
Seriously, to this day, I leave the money in PayPal until the customers message me and lets me know they are enjoying the knife.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets scary. I think you're spot on about the silent, especially, or as far as like if you do an internet silent bid, you get a very good idea. You see a curve, of the very lowest to the highest, and a lot of in between, where you get to kind of see where people are at, where their heads are at with this knife.
Well, somewhere in there, you could argue that it's the truest valuation of what you should try to understand, which is what is your stuff selling for out there versus what you're charging, right? If you're trying to make sure that your pricing is in a spot where there's room for some upside for customers, but at the same time, you know what I mean? Want to make sure that you're being compensated fairly for what you're doing too.
I've never done one, so maybe I should try to do one online.
It's interesting, and you will get some very low, a couple crazy low ones. And it used to rattle Abby a little bit. She'd be like, what is that about? Because I've had some pretty crazy ones that are, like I don't want to say the price, but way low. And I'm like, you know what? I'd rather, what if that's all the money the guy has? I think it's cooler that some guy would want to give me all his money, even if it's that low, than the guy that has a ton of money. And you know what I mean? There's something, I don't know, that's probably going to come out wrong, but
no, I agree.
The idea of, this is all my money, I'd like to give it for that knife is, even if it's not, some certain amount or whatever.
Yeah.
She got offended because I offered $250 for a Kinesis one time. That's what this is all about.
Yeah.
Did you get it?
No. I didn't actually do it either, but that would be funny. I should try that sometime.
Well, McGinnis
get all upset
next to me at TKI, and he came real close to getting some very awkward bids from me.
So one thing I think we probably should start to wrap this thing up because we're starting to run a little bit long. But one thing I would like to hit on, because I've actually read in a couple different places people talking about the whole beep beep lottery thing. And, for me personally, I love the idea of beep beep lottery because I've been called in what I'll refer to as a traditional lottery, whether it's the Emerson lottery or at a very busy table at a show, and stood there kind of like super excited and slightly wigged out, and ended up maybe not even picking the knife that I really would have wanted if I'd had the time to think a little. And so for me, I love beep beep lottery because it gives me time to talk to the maker and pick out a knife. So I think it's a great solution, but the number of people I've seen make comments about how beep beep lotteries are rigged or whatever, you guys should talk to that, I think.
That was the weirdest thing ever. That was a Lucas Burnley thing, and the crowds got crazy. And Blade was not, unless you had a room or whatever it was, they didn't like those anymore because they got a little out of hand. They would get real big, and I'm not a fan of a bunch of people looking at me. And kind of with very expectant eyes, they'll have a look at you like, pick me. And I'm just kind of like, all right, I'm not a look at me kind of guy. But, so when he came up with that, I thought it was awesome. But then, one of the first things you heard after that was the makers do beep beep so they can pick your friends sort of thing. And I'm thinking to myself, why in the hell would we spend all this money, like Tom just detailed, about coming to these shows to sell a knife to a friend? Couldn't we just sit at home and do that?
Right.
If that's what we wanted to do. It was very strange, and I think it's a great system. It keeps, oddly enough, there's still crowds sometimes, and I don't understand that one though.
I don't understand how people could say that it's rigged. I mean, at least the ones I've watched, there's tickets in a bag and somebody draws it, and that's the winner, I feel that it's been, I know at least the ones I've watched, I sit up right next to Luke. And mine, I mean, I usually have somebody else draw it, and there's the ticket. That's the winner,
I think we're just not going to make everybody happy. And that's part of it. But it's a good system. I like it. Sean, you use that or use the old school lottery?
Man, I'm old school. I don't have a cell phone.
Well, that would put a little crank in your.
Well, Sean's is the holla holla lottery.
Yeah, it don't take long, man. I mean, I'm just trying to get rid of a couple knives. It don't take long to get some names in a bag and pull them.
I did have a poor.
Well, I mean,
what's that? I was going to say I did have a poor old fellow. When we started doing the beep beep, he was like, "I don't have a cell phone. How do I enter?" And I'm like, you just broke my brain. I don't know what to tell you. I was like, do you have a friend with a cell phone? And he was just like, no, I came alone. I'm like, I got nothing for you. I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. I just assumed that,
Yeah. Well, I really like the beep beep lottery system, for a couple reasons. One, if you pay a lot of money to go to Blade Show, in my opinion, you should be out looking at stuff and talking to people instead of standing in a lotto. The beauty of it is you put your information in, you drop your tickets, and then you go wherever you need to go and talk to people. You can talk to, me, however it works, I mean, that's also why I'll probably never do a first come, first serve, because I see guys spending the night places. And that's a great story for some of these people, and that's what they want to do. Awesome. For me, it's about, enjoying the experience with friends, catching some meals, all that kind of stuff. And so the Beep Beep lottery lets me do that. And I don't feel like I'm putting a burden on any of my customers either.
But at the same time, I kind of get the overnight thing. It's sort of the endurance version of, the open bid winner.
No, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you definitely have a story, but I just don't want to do that to my customers.
No, it's not something I'm gonna do. But I get it. I in a way, I get it.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm an exception, but as a collector, for me, beep beep all day, no problem. I love that for exactly the reason Tom described. I go to the tables where I want to be in. I enter the lottery. I have my cell phone out of my pocket, and I go enjoy the show. And that to me is so much. And
I think I picked you last year, right, Mark? You won a knife off my table, I think, right?
In New York, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Totally rigged.
The only problem I hear with it is, I guess, cell reception sometimes, or that's the only thing I really hear that people complain about is that sometimes the cell reception is bad. But I don't know. Is that a problem that you've come across, Mark, or?
No, I've heard it too, but
I've never not gotten a hold of someone.
I haven't either.
A lot of people do a lot of complaining about stuff that isn't even a real thing. You know what I mean? I don't know. To me, okay, so I used to keep a thread on USN every show that had every major show. I would make a thread. Well, certainly for the shows I was going to, I would make a thread for Blade Show, for Gathering, for New York Show, where I was tracking all the lottery times. And one piece of it was because I had a bunch of knife maker friends and they wanted to block out their space, right? And so I would PM you guys or text you or whatever and say, hey man, are you doing a lottery? Here's the time windows that no one's using yet. Or, you know what I mean? Or stake out your spot. Yep. And I would keep this thread. And selfishly, the reason for keeping the thread was I wanted to know at whose table I needed to be when. And it was very stressful. I mean, like you said, minus the table price part, shows are super expensive for me to go to too, right? And yes, I'll go anyway, whether I get a knife or not. Anymore, I don't even go in with any expectation of bringing home knives. It's almost like a surprise when I do, but because I go to see my friends and hang out or whatever. But at the same time, it's a hell of a lot of money, and
you should optimize your chances.
Well, yeah, and it's like, okay, I don't know how many times I'm standing in a assholes to elbows crowd of sweaty dudes, can't hear what's numbers are being called anyway. And it's like a frustrating thing. It's a whole bunch of stress. And oh, by the way, I spent $5,000 to be here this weekend too. And that sucks, man. Yeah. I don't want any part of that. That's awful. So I go by, I drop my phone number, or I write it in these little beep beep books that we're using now or whatever. And it's beautiful. It's like, hey man, great to see you. You look at the knives, and if I get called, awesome. I'll come back and give you some money. It'd be beautiful.
It's a good system.
But if not, I just enjoy the show.
Well, and one of the other things that like would make me break out in a cold sweat and have bad dreams and all that was if I had to have a lotto up front, and my nightmare would be that no one would show up.
Right.
Oh yeah. If at least, for me with the beep beep lotto, you're dropping your tickets in and you can't really see how many others are in there, that was one of the big reasons I did it to start with, because I was afraid, hey, is anyone going to want to enter my lotto, and at least this way it would be like low shame, right?
Hey, Tom, these bags look empty. Oh, no, man. I've been emptying them out into this special spot.
Right, yeah. But seriously, I mean, I had boxes with little slots in them so you couldn't actually see.
Right.
That's called the "No, I'm good" scare.
Right?
From a previous episode, you guys should have hopefully heard.
Yeah.
But I don't know. One of the best things about the beep beep to me, though, is we've got a lot of customers that are friends, that we've known. And Mark, you've never won one of my lotteries before, have you?
Nope.
Yeah, that kind of sucks. That's a shitty part about it. But you can text your friend and be like, "Hey," and just text some normal stuff. You feel kind of like a dick, but just, "Hey, you won my friendship."
Yeah.
You won, and then next text, nothing.
Right. All right. Well, this ended up being a long-ass conversation about pricing, but I think it was good and interesting, hopefully, for people. You guys have anything else you want to add?
The one thing I didn't know if we ought to talk about is with the open bid, silent bid stuff is the amount of them and why there's sometimes the idea of sometimes it's too much or too little. Or is that something you guys don't see or feel or?
No, I totally feel that. I mean, I think you can definitely go to the well way too many times on that.
Very much.
And I would agree. I feel that way. I don't know if our customers feel that way, but yeah, I mean, I'm very hesitant to do them in the group and stuff. I don't want to, it to come across it every time I'm trying to, get max profit type stuff.
Yeah, there's this very kind of odd idea of too much max profit or too much profit is too bad. It's kind of strange. But yeah,
we got to be that starving artist.
There's a definite balance that I feel like I have to play or have to be on.
Yeah, and I think that it's good that we worry about that stuff. I honestly don't know that our customers do a lot. I don't know that.
And a lot of them are just absolutely random. Sometimes it's a knife I have no clue. It's either a bit new or something funky, and I don't really know how to price it, or if it's something that just, like I got one here that it took me 5 blades. This is the 5th blade on it, for various reasons. That I'm just like, yeah. Now, if you're not getting table price, you're going out. You're getting a silent treatment. So it's just interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, we got real chatty on prices, didn't we? I don't know if we answered any questions or got anywhere, but we definitely talked a lot.
Well, I think we let people take a look into the difficulty in some of the stuff that goes into our thought process. So I think that's never a bad idea.
I think they probably might understand that we have a hard time with it. It's tougher than we thought.
Okay, so next show's Blade Show. We've been talking about that for a while and rubbing it in, but that's coming up here in it's first weekend in April, so 2 months, 8 weeks-ish from Blade Show. Yeah.
Have you guys started getting ready yet?
I have 3 at level 1 finished. And you guys know what level 1 finished is, don't you?
No.
You don't have this weird levels where you're it doesn't have the clip quite done yet or not sharpened, but you put it away and tell yourself, yeah, that's pretty close to finished.
Okay.
No.
That's how you get yourself in trouble, just so you know.
Oh yeah. Then you get closer and you're like, shit, I got a bunch of clips to finish. No, I've got 2 that are completely finished and 1 that needs a clip. So
dude, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, pretty proud of myself on that one. Now I just need to not slack off and be like, oh, I got 3, I'm good, and then realize it's 3 weeks till Blade or something.
It'll happen.
It will.
Yeah.
Tom, how are you looking for Blade Show?
So we're just getting started. We laid out, 30 knives today, fixed blades, or last week, and we've got the handles all cut out, and they're not quite ready to glue up, but we've got that started, and I've got a few folders started, not really very far down the road, but the hope is to go heavy for blade. I'm hoping to bring 10 to 15 folders, and I'd like to bring 50 or 60 fixed blades. We'll see if it happens.
Wow.
And a pirate sword.
Yeah, a boarding cutlass.
Boarding cutlass. But, yeah, no, we've started, the time always seems like goes by really fast from now until Blade.
No doubt.
I think part of that is there's a lot of stuff going on with the kids and all that.
Very much.
How about with you, Sean?
Since I'm just going to be an attendee and not an exhibitor, I ain't got to worry about it.
Yeah.
Best decision I ever made.
You're going to be so relaxed that week before Blade.
Well, I ain't going to say I'm going to be totally relaxed, but I ain't going to have the stress you guys got.
Yeah, what made you decide to not be an exhibitor this year?
I didn't exhibit last year.
Because you have in the past, right?
Oh, yeah, consistently.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
But I didn't last year either.
I didn't know that.
Best decision I made, man. I got tired of people standing in front of me and looking at me. I got tired of people trying to work angles at me. I just got tired of so much shit that I come to the conclusion, guess what? I can sell a knife at home and not go through all this shit, and I can actually go to a knife show and have a good time.
Yeah, enjoy yourself.
And last year was the first time I've had a fun time at Blade in probably 10 years.
Awesome.
I feel kind of bad. I don't sell on Saturday. It's my Sabbath. But it's so nice. I mean, for me anyways, it's so nice because it's a day where I don't have the stress of selling. I can hang out with my friends and walk around and just talk to people, and it's a beautiful thing. So I know exactly where you're coming from.
Well, you guys can come talk to me. I'll be at my table.
Oh, I plan on trolling your table hard.
Yeah.
All right. So I don't know. I think that's pretty much it, isn't it, fellas?
I think so. That was a good podcast.
It was a nice chat. I think we had a good talk there.
Well, as always, we appreciate everybody tuning in and helping us out with conversation and participating in the Facebook group. That's always a lot of fun. We get good feedback there. We've got lots of good Q&A questions. We had some queued up for this time because we weren't sure if it was going to run a full episode, but it certainly did. So we'll keep those in the bank here and pull them out when we need to and bring you some more Q&A a little bit later on. On the Randall thing, we're going to keep doing our research and trying to lay out how we want to walk through it. And like I said, it'll be either episode 10 or 11 or somewhere in there. We like to do the history thing, but like I said, I think we really want to try to do it right.
I'm pretty sure we're going to get our knife PhDs after this episode, that Randall episode.
Yeah,
it's a lot of research.
It's a crazy amount of information. I mean, the span is so huge. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be good.
All right. Well, I think that's it. We appreciate everybody listening and following along with us, and hope you enjoy the show, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you all.
To learn more about our makers, you can find Tom Crine on the web at crineknives.net, in his Facebook group, Crine Knives, or in his Instagram account at Crine Knives. For Michael Birch, check birchtreeblades.com, Facebook group Birch Tree Blade Works, or Michael's Instagram at birchtreeblades. For myself and the Raygun Bead Project, we're on the web at raygundivision.com. We have a Facebook group called Raygun Division, or my personal Instagram at msteiner. For those interested in photos, references from the show, or some discussion about the show itself, you can find us on the web at markofthemaker.com, in a Facebook group called Mark of the Maker, or on our Instagram at Mark of the Maker. Last but not least, the ultra cool and haunting background music we use for the show is a piece called Noir Guitar by Stevie's Amp Shack, found at the Free Music Archive and licensed under Creative Commons CC BY 4.0. Thanks for listening.